Hello again. My name's Greg Allen, and I'm giving a presentation today for Open Week. It's titled Adapting to Adapt, and really the goal or what I plan to talk about during this presentation is an introduction to ADAPT. So a lot of different presentations going on this week for Open Week. So I just kind of want to go over what is ADAPT and then talk about my experiences in different ways that you can use ADAPT. Go into a little bit about student feedback. This would be feedback from students in my courses, and then go into kind of the ways ADAPT is adapting, changing, and kind of the future of ADAPT. So just before we get started, I've got a couple logos on here. We've got the LibreText. If you're familiar with the LibreText, this is kind of where ADAPT got started. And this was from funding multiple sources, but one of the sources and how I got involved in the project is through the California Learning Lab. So with that, I think we might as well go get started and start thinking about ADAPT. Sorry, I'm navigating a lot of chat things right now. Here's just a brief introduction to ADAPT. And I'm going to share my slides. And so we have the hyperlink over here. But you've got a QR code. This is the first QR code I've ever made. And that takes you to a video where Delmer Larson goes over ADAPT and talks about the various features of ADAPT. And so what is ADAPT? Well, the name ADAPT came from an adaptive learning assessment system. So a fancy name of saying it's an online free homework system. And so it's based in the LibreText platform. And essentially what it is a homework system with questions available in all sorts of disciplines. So there's Spanish, physics, math, humanities. I teach chemistry, so obviously there's chemistry and more. So really there's a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different courses within those disciplines that have questions available in the ADAPT homework. So this isn't just the system that's built for the sciences. This is a system that's built for science, humanities, etc. And so let's look a little bit more at kind of what you can do with ADAPT. So what I really appreciate and like about ADAPT is that it provides a multitude of options. And so this is options in assignment structure as well as question types. So here I just have a screenshot of different things or options you have when making an assignment. So we have different ways you can score the questions, performance or completion. If you want your students to be graded on whether or not they got the answer correct, you can do performance. Completion, if they just participated. And I'll talk a little bit about how I use these two different scoring types. You can specify the number of points per questions where you can default it. But what's great is you can also change that number of points based on the question. And so if you have some questions that require more work or more time from the students, you can give those questions more points, give them a higher weight in the overall score. Then you can think about the type of grading or feedback that you're giving students. This would be in the assessment type. And so a real-time graded assessment would be something that the minute the student submits an answer, they get some indication about whether the answer is right or wrong. And this only, of course, works for what we'll say is auto-graded questions, so questions that have an auto-graded option. But other grading styles like delayed grading, and then I'll talk a little bit about these learning tree assessments, but you can also use it for clicker assessments. So in class, if you're using some kind of clicker, students can log in with their technology and you can use this like you would a more traditional clicker type assessment. And so in your delayed grading assessment, you have other options in terms of question types. And so, in chemistry, we often have kind of math-like or questions that you can automatically grade using a computer because there's a right or wrong answer. We also have options where students might need to explain things or discuss things. And so there's more free response questions or questions that, involve more input from the student, work from the student that doesn't necessarily lend itself to an auto-graded type assessment. And so that can be in a delayed grading assessment. And then, you can really get more specifics of, how many attempts can a student have? Do they have multiple attempts to try a problem? Can they view a hint? So if they get stuck, you can get a hint that might say, oh, think about doing this, or make sure you're checking this. And then the availability of solutions. So there's really just, just in these, 5 categories, there's a multitude of options that you can do. And then as you think about the type of questions, we have question types that really multiple choice, put in a number, drop down menu, free response, just kind of your traditional types of questions that you might see, say, in your learning management system if you're doing an online quiz, etc. And so how do I use this? Well, I think of this, I think of homework as really a great way for my students to practice the material and the types of questions that they'll encounter in our assessments, like the quizzes and exams. And one of the things that I've encountered in the past is students who get really nervous about having one attempt left or getting that right answer. And I really want to just encourage the students to try things, part of doing chemistry, part of doing science, part of just learning is trying and thinking about your answer or your solution, reflecting on that and improving it if you got the wrong answer. And so for one of my homework assignments, I call it part 1, students are actually just given instant feedback, unlimited attempts, and they're really graded on completion. And did they do the assignment? Did they attempt the question? And then there's another part where I want to make sure I'm checking their understanding myself. And so there's a second part to their homework. And this is graded for accuracy. And it's usually delayed feedback because I'll have a question that's like, explain the relationship between 2 things or something along those lines. And so I use these multitude of assessments or these different types of assessments in my course to give my students different opportunities to demonstrate their learning, as well as provide different feedback systems. And what's great about ADAPT is I can make these 2 homework systems and use them for my students. And it's fairly simple. My students, there's no, once we establish the norm, my students kind of understand and recognize the differences between these 2 homeworks. And so ADAPT is a platform that really gives you a lot of creativity and options in implementing different types of homeworks, different types of assessments. And I will say, I've been talking a lot about homework, but there are instructors who will use these for online quizzes. So it's not that it's just a homework system. This can also be used as a assessment or quiz-like system, but I use it for homework. So I'm really speaking from my experience. And so where do these questions come from? And where the questions come from maybe depends on what discipline or what library you're interacting with. But there is the ADAPT Commons, and this is a collection of assignments that are usually aligned to textbook maps. So for example, in chemistry, there's the OpenStax textbook. That's the OpenStax chemistry textbook. And there are questions that are for each section. And so I can pull up chapter 1 from the OpenStax textbook, and I can use those questions and integrate those questions into my course. And then, of course, there's options to create your own. And then there's becoming, as we're developing ADAPT and creating more options for instructors, you can write your own just kind of text-based problems. That's kind of where I started with a lot of the explain or free response questions. But now we can start thinking about writing code to create auto-graded questions. And then, of course, as I create questions or as other instructors create questions, and I think the whole great thing about open access or open educational resources is share with a friend. As we generate things, we can share with our colleagues, we can share across colleges, universities, etc. And you can share questions, you can share assignments, and so forth. So it's really got a lot of options for finding and creating questions. And I think one of the nice things about the ability to create and find these questions is that then there's an ability to think about how you tag or align these questions to a framework or taxonomy. And so what do I mean by that? Well, if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, Marzano's taxonomy, where we think about the types of learning or the types of skills or the types of outcomes that our students are generating, where like with Bloom's taxonomy, you have different areas, we can identify certain questions based on these and tag these so that you as an instructor could get feedback about not only the specific content that your students are doing. So for example, in chemistry, understanding of atoms, I could look at that, but I could look across the entire course and say, how are my students doing with demonstrating a certain type of skill outcome knowledge? How are my students doing with comprehension? How are my students doing with identification? With these questions that are tagged, we can build these kind of frameworks into our questions and into these homework assignments. And one of the things that's being developed as part of the grant, the California Learning Lab grant, is an instructor interface where you can see how your students are doing based on these taxonomies, or even your own course learning objectives or learning outcomes. That's in development, and I don't necessarily, I have not used that personally, but I've been part of thinking about the taxonomies and alignment of questions to these taxonomies in this grant. And so, ADAPT is really offering a lot of different opportunities for students to use, or for instructors to use different types of homework systems, but also giving us more control per se over the types of questions and how we align these questions. I've had experience using other homework systems that are made by publishers, and they offer limited control for the instructor, where here I think we have a little more freedom and ability to see how the homework system can help in our courses. And so I talked a little bit about how I use ADAPT, but I think I want to give a little context for my experience with ADAPT and how it works in my classrooms, because what I'm going to do next is talk about some student feedback or how students are interacting with ADAPT. So I teach at Mendocino College. It's a community college in California, located in Northern California. This is a rural community college. And I teach chemistry. So our chemistry courses, the courses that I teach, they generally have 24 students if we're meeting in person, or 35 online. So I do teach, compared to a lot of other instructors, what we say very small courses. These become very intimate courses. And so I really, I'm able to interact with my students one-on-one or in very small groups almost all the time when we have lecture or lab. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I'm part of the California Learning Lab grant for using the ADAPT system. I'm an implementer of the ADAPT system as part of this grant. And so I started using ADAPT in the fall of 2021 for my general chemistry courses. And I've used those since in both the online and in-person courses. And then in the fall of 2022, so last semester, I started using this in my introduction to chemistry. So the initial implementation of the grant focused on general chemistry, but now we're taking that grant to the broader chemistry discipline. And so as you can probably guess, being a rural community college, teaching general chemistry and intro chemistry, I encounter a wide variety of students. And, I could teach students that are still in the K through 12 system, all the way up to students that are older than myself, re-entering the college system to change their career and so forth. So we get a variety of students, and that means we get a variety of skill sets. Skill sets both in terms of prerequisite knowledge and then also comfort and ability with technology. And I'm saying this because ADAPT is a system that is rooted in technology. And so just to give a little insights into the feedback that I'm about to present from my students as we think about ADAPT. So this is how I use it. I talked a little bit about my homework system. I do use it mainly for a homework system. And I have been using it for, what is it now? 2 years, it feels like, two plus years. And so I've really enjoyed using ADAPT. I've enjoyed being part of the group that's improving ADAPT and interacting with others in the grant for how we can make this a system that really offers a premier free homework system for any type of instructor across all universities and colleges. So let's go into a little bit about the student feedback. And so as part of my courses, I regularly do surveys to get feedback from my students about the quality of instruction the quality of the classroom environment. And as we've been using ADAPT, I've asked them specifically about the quality of the ADAPT system. And so we'll start with this. I'm using my introductory students because they are the ones that responded to the surveys really to some degree. And so these are the questions. The questions were presented in a strongly agree to strongly disagree Likert scale. And so the first question we can think about is, the homework helps support my learning. And so, can we do it? Yes, we can. So this was the fall of 22, had been the first semester that I did this for my intro courses, and then the spring of 23. And so for the most part, you can see that well over, or about 75 or 2/3 of my students agree or strongly agree that the homework is supporting their learning. So that's a great sign that the students do feel that the homework system is supporting their learning. There are some neutral stances, and those students, I don't have specific information, but in one instances, these could be students that are not doing the homework. The next question that really starts thinking about, that could just be a general question about homework. Does homework support your learning? But the next questions, or the next series of questions, really look at the ADAPT system specifically. So this first one, the feedback was useful and helped me learn. So this would be the feedback provided by the ADAPT system when students are getting a question correct or incorrect. And so in the fall, so this first pie, the fall, we see that the majority of the students were in the neutral to disagree categories. And then in the spring, we see that maybe a bigger slice of the pie, but still about 50% of the students are kind of split on whether or not the feedback was useful and helpful to their learning. And so I think, to me, this is something that I need to reflect on in terms of using ADAPT and and what type of feedback my students are getting with ADAPT. And I'll talk a little bit more about that kind of, how we're changing ADAPT later on in the presentation. As we continue with thinking about the feedback, the homework system is too hard to navigate. So as we think about students' ability, we don't want the barrier to be the system. We want the barrier to be the content knowledge. And so well, I guess I should rephrase that. We don't want the challenge to an incorrect answer be that the student can't use the system and can't enter an answer. As instructors, we want the student to focus on the content. And if there's issues, we want it to be more aligned with their misunderstanding of the material rather than an inability to answer the question. And so when we think about the homework system is too hard to navigate, we really, personally, I don't want this to be agreed. I want this to be a disagree. And so when we look at fall of 2022, there was actually over the majority of the students agreed with this, that the homework system was too challenging for them to use or navigate. And in between fall and spring, over that winter break, I think what's great about this ADAPT system was we reflected on this, the people working in ADAPT, and I feel have made improvements. If we look at the spring 23, now we have a slice of the pie that's maybe less than a third, maybe a quarter of the students that are in the agree to strongly agree category, where the remaining students are either neutral or disagreeing. And so we have data here that's showing that the ability to navigate the system is improving. And even further, I want to reflect on this data point because I would prefer that my students are in the disagree, and so or more. And so this is information for us as we think about implementing and improving ADAPT to reflect on how is the homework system too hard to navigate and how can we improve that. And then, as we think about technology, as we think about, entering answers to technology that's trying to auto-grade things, technology looks for very specific things. They look for very specific formats. And so the question, I did not know how to enter answers in the homework. Well, if we look, it's kind of still about 50% of the students are in somewhat of the degree or agree phase when they look at fall 22 to fall 23. And some of this, as chemistry, we are learning, we're not only learning ideas, but we're learning new symbols, new ways of conveying information using chemistry symbols. And so, I don't know how much of this is a part of the ADAPT system versus students struggling with just how, in a chemical formula, we use a subscript. Some students don't necessarily recognize this even when they're writing by hand. And so some of this could be the nature of my discipline, but I think this is an important data set for us to reflect on and how we think about our students and their ability to enter questions and to adapt. And so in its current state, I've talked to a lot of my students this semester, and they say it's working and it's providing the feedback and it's providing them an opportunity to practice the material, but that doesn't mean there's not improvements we can make. And I think as we move forward with ADAPT, as we go through multitude of versions, we need to reflect and improve the navigation and feedback and ways students are answering. And some of that could be simple changes of, I'll give an example. When we name some ionic compounds, there's a question of, do you include a space in between certain information? Do you include a space in between two words, a space in between what we'd say Roman numerals? And in ADAPT, you do not include that space. And so we could just add a simple information, simple note. When answering this problem, do not include a space. And that would allow the students to get more information about entering answers. And so as I look at the student feedback, I'm comforted by the fact that it's helping my students and that there's been improvements. But I think I want to be upfront in saying that this is not clean and polished like you would get from a publisher's homework set. And the student feedback represents this. But we are improving, and our goal is to get to a point where these barriers are minimized through various avenues. And so, one more question. This is actually my favorite question. There are too many bugs and issues. And actually, this is showing the most significant change when comparing fall 2022 to spring 23. You can see that over 50% of the students agreed with this, so it was too buggy. But now when we look at the slice of the pie, it's about 1/3 of the students falling into the agree or strongly agree combo category. And so to me, this is also a good sign that the bugs and the issues are being resolved as we improve and develop the ADAPT system. So let's think about how we're improving this. Let's think about some of the changes that we're making with the ADAPT system. And so the main one is, to me right now, is overcoming entry issues. And so here I have a screenshot of a question. Don't worry about the question. This is a chemistry question thinking about gases. I'm teaching gases right now. That's why I pulled out this question. And so when a student goes to enter their answer, they originally pulled up this text box. So it's almost like the ribbon that you would see in Microsoft Word. If you're trying to insert an equation, you would see all those options. And I think for a lot of our students, what the heck is that infinity sign? Why would I use pi? What is that U? A lot of the students were overwhelmed by the options within this, when really what they needed to do was type this in a format called scientific notation, where it's a value and then you have times 10 to a power. And so there was a significant barrier, and I think admittedly there were too many options for a student to enter scientific notation. And so we recognized this and we ultimately simplified the process. And so now we have, new version, I don't know what version we're on, but we simplified the options available to the students, where you see that SCI, that's the scientific notation button, where it just inserts that format. And now the students just have to plug in the appropriate information into the format. And honestly, I can't tell you how many emails I got from students last semester and before saying, I don't know how to enter scientific notation. I have gotten 0 emails this semester about scientific notation, with one exception. Students didn't know how to do it when I had not changed the options. I had not entered the code for this type of ribbon. And so now that we've implemented or thought about the options students use when entering, we've streamlined and improved the entry issues. And as I mentioned earlier, we can change the text to give students indication about how they should answer their answers, because we're dealing with technology, and technology is rigid. technology is looking for specific formats, specific entries, and although they may have the right answer, they might not have the appropriate format. And again, we don't want the barrier to be the format. And to me, we've overcome some of these issues and streamlined the responses for the students. And so another thing that I think we need to look at and address when entering and giving students feedback is really improving the messaging for our students. And so here I have an example where students need to identify the ions in this barium oxide BaO compound. Don't worry too much about the content, but what you can see is that I have two options in terms of the positive or negative sign. In this case, it would be the value followed by the sign, where with O for oxygen, it's the sign followed by the value. The green box indicates that the student got the answer correct. The red box indicates that it was an incorrect option. And so although barium has a 2+ charge, the system is looking for a very specific format. And so when the student enters their answer, they get this, and they're getting ionic correct, and then they're getting incorrect, and they don't see an answer here. And so this is a challenge for our students. Is it says missing operand after plus. I don't, if you're not familiar with maybe some of the language in the coding or language that we use in mathematics, this would make very little sense to our students. And so I think this is a key area where we can revise the message given to our students, where what I would like to see is a reminder saying, hey, it looks like the entry format is incorrect. Revisit the text format, or make sure the charge is written before the value, giving more specific feedback. And as we think even further, here I have an answer, or here I have an example where students are writing a chemical reaction. And I talked about this briefly, but these values need to be subscripts. So if you see in the LiClO4, that 4 is a subscript, where in H2O, that 2 is a large number, not a subscript. And if you look in the answer preview, it says can't combine an element and a number. I think to a student, this is a challenging message and something that we can revise and really give more tailored feedback. And so I want to be, I want to be honest with what our students are getting, but I am hopeful in that with some expert insights, we can easily change the code to say, oh, it looks like a formula, maybe use a subscript rather than a large number. And so I think, these are very low-hanging fruit that we can easily address as we develop this ADAPT system. And so this is, I think, where I'm really excited actually about ADAPT in terms of our goal as the grant and what ADAPT can do. And this is what we call and what we've been talking about in terms in the grant, what we're calling learning trees. And one of the things that might happen to a student is they're working on a problem and they get it wrong. And ideally what we want our students to do is go review the notes or go to a tutor or come talk to us. But what if a student's working on this at 10 p.m.? Or, what if a student doesn't know where to go in their notes? Oftentimes a student might be, this is a really intimidating question. I don't know where we talked about this. And so this is, to me, a very powerful addition that we're developing and piloting in ADAPT and what we call learning trees. And so a learning tree starts with a root question. So this is an ADAPT question. It has to be an auto-graded question because we need to identify whether or not the student got it correct or incorrect. And so this ADAPT question, the student interacts with the question. If they get it right, great, they move on, congratulations. But if they get it wrong, there's now going to be materials provided to them to help them learn how to solve this problem. And those materials begin with a strategy map. So the student gets a notification that says, unfortunately, you got this question wrong. Please come into the strategy, or please come into our tree and investigate and go through our learning tree to learn how to solve this problem. And so it starts with the strategy map that outlines the general strategy and skills. And so, in my courses, we can think about the individual skills required to complete the root question. Say there's 2 skills that the students need to do in order to solve the problem. I can say, to solve this problem, you need to know how to do this and this. And what we've now created are branches where you can learn about these skills. And so our tree branches off into 2 branches, and those branches are about the specific skills required to solve the root question. And in that branch, we have what we're calling an exposition. And this is a text or video describing or giving an example of the skill. Maybe the skill is a quick reminder, paragraph text from a LibreTexts page. Maybe you can reference your LibreTexts page for that section. Or it can be a video. And as part of the learning grant or the Learning Lab grant, we have developed some specific videos, but you can pull in videos from other sources. You can make your own videos if you choose. And then that student is then, after that, given an assessment that's an ADAPT question about that specific skill. And if they get, and that is kind of like we can call that a knowledge check. You learned a little bit about the skill. Let's see if you remember that. If you didn't, go back and review the material. Look at something else. But if you got it right, let's go back and apply it to the root question. And so when they finish an assessment, they can go back to the root question. And hopefully what we've done is we've developed the expositions and assessments that's giving the students the skills to complete that root question. And this is really, Delmer uses the choose your own path adapting, where I think this is the power of the ADAPT system, where now we can give students not only feedback about the problem, but tools and resources and support to solve that problem, so that they're no longer, they can really do this on their own. We, of course, will support them as instructors, but, when students are working on their own at 2 o'clock in the morning or right around dinner, and they can't access a support resource, the ADAPT system now becomes a support resource for them. And so I kind of want to give a little bit about, I showed how you can manipulate homework sets or questions. I want to think about options you have in these learning trees. And in this, we have, again, more options. And so when we think about, when can a student go back and reattempt the root question? Well, essentially, we can say, well, a student can go back to the root once they've completed a certain number of assessments or branches. And so if I say, all right, this question has 3 skills, a student should demonstrate that they acquire 1 skill and they can go back and redo the root. If they get the root wrong again, they just go back into the branch, and then they can do another exposition. And so they can keep going in and out of our tree to the root to help develop those skills. And you can limit that. Maybe you don't want a student just doing this forever. At some point, you have to say, we need to move on. And so you can limit the number of what we call resets. A reset would be when you go back into the root question. Now, say you want this to be time-based. And so you can adjust this to say, I just think I want my students to do some time on task. They don't need to respond to a second question. I want them to make sure they're doing something. And so this is time-based. And so we have that option built into that. And then we can think about, are you getting a free pass or moving on? And so this is, I think, really great in terms of the adaptability of ADAPT. How can we improve ADAPT? And the learning trees, to me, I'm really excited about and want to have as a resource for my students, because it allows them to think about, to get access to videos, text, support resources while they're attempting that specific problem, so that they get that tailored information rather than being thrown to the wind to look through their notes or look through very long textbook pages, etc. And so finally, with the learning trees, I'm excited about them. So I'm going to give you an example. And so if I have a problem in chemistry where students need to calculate the reaction yield or how much a reaction will produce, if they get it wrong, they're taken into a strategy map. And in that strategy map, I outline the skills or kind of content, ideas, and problem-solving strategies that they need to use to solve this problem. And for this specific problem, we break it out into 3. And so they have this idea of limiting reactants. Don't worry about the terminology, but think about running out about eggs before you run out of flour for a chemical reaction compared to baking. Something along those ideas. They need to have the skill set to do that before they can actually calculate percent yield. So maybe they forgot how to do that. We've got other skill sets, and then just the calculation of percent yield. Well, for each of 3 of these skills, we have these expositions. For 2 of them, it's a problem-solving video, a video that kind of gives a brief introduction and shows them how to solve a problem. We have also then maybe they just forgot the formula, and so they have a LibreTexts page that says, hey, this is the percent yield formula. This is what you need to solve the percent yield formula. And then this follows up with assessments relating to that specific skill set. And so, this is something that we hope to implement, and something that when I did the survey, one student commented, what's great about the ADAPT system is I have a homework problem and I can compare it directly to a YouTube video. Now, what's great is that student found that YouTube video on their own, but now we can embed that YouTube video and say, hey, look, this is the type of problem you're solving. Here's a YouTube video that can help you. Here's a YouTube video or a video on limiting reactants when you're using grams. Look, you're solving a problem like that. Try that out. Learn from this video and see if it helps you with the root. And so what I think is great about ADAPT is it's working for my students. Yes, we need to improve some things, but it's really moving towards a nice adaptable system for not only our students, but us as instructors in thinking about how we administer and give out homework. And so just some final thoughts. One of the things that I really appreciate about ADAPT. I should say in my intro course, I've moved to an online textbook. I use a LibreTexts intro course, so that's a free online textbook. Now with the online homework system, there is 0 cost associated with taking my course. The college has done something to reduce lab costs, but there is 0 cost. And this is actually a mission, a big mission with the Chancellor's Office, the California Community College Chancellor's Office, and the greater California Community College system, where we are trying to create courses and degrees so that our students have 0 cost to take those courses outside, of course, of paying for the course itself. The other thing I kind of want to highlight here is that our students are learning how to use the system, and I think it's a big one here. We are learning how to use the system too, and so we're starting to develop a community of experts, a community of users who are learning how to change and tweak the system. And I want to really highlight the amazing work that the ADAPT team is doing to respond to these changes and address the feedback from these students. As a faculty member, I feel supported from them, and I feel that they are committed to ensuring that this system is working for all students. And that system is providing feedback. Yes, we can improve it. And my excitement is about the adaptability of ADAPT, how we can make this a system that really is a learning tool for our students rather than an assessment. It becomes a tool for learning rather than a tool for evaluating learning, if you can kind of see the difference in my philosophy there. And so those are my final thoughts. I want to make time for questions, but before we do that, I want to give a major thanks to Delmer Larson, Eric Keene. Those are the 2 individuals that I work most with in terms of working with ADAPT. And they are a part of a greater team, so I don't want to not acknowledge the greater ADAPT team and those working on ADAPT. I'm including the CEL team. That's the acronym for our California Learning Lab Grant. I want to thank them for the conversations and ways they've improved the ADAPT system and materials they've generated for this, and just the general community and users of ADAPT. I also want to thank my college for giving me the opportunity to do this in my class and allowing some freedom to do that. Of course, LibreTexts, and then the California Lab Grant. So with that, I will open that up for questions if you have any. I got the chat open. You're welcome to just kind of chime in with your mic. I hope that I provided an excellent overview a little bit for ADAPT, talked about my experience, and I'm always happy to chat and talk about the system. So will ADAPT, I see the question in chat, will ADAPT homework system be free for students and instructor when the grant runs out? So as part of the grant, I know that we've committed to keeping it free for, and I should say I'm not maybe the best person to answer this, but I know that we've committed to ensuring that it's free for California students. But I know that the cost really has been just getting the thing running. There's not a lot of maintenance cost. There might be server, but there's other grant money used in the system, and it really is a goal to make sure that this is free for all students. And so I can't say. Yeah, Jennifer just chimed in that we are working to keep it free or as low cost as possible. You know, a frustration I had with a lot of the homework systems is when they would come out, it would be $20. The next semester it'd be 25. Semester after that, it was 100. You know, so it's really like I couldn't depend on this. And so I really feel that the cost is going to be so minimal. It might be, you know, less than $10 if there is, but it really, I feel there's a commitment to keeping this no cost. Yeah, and Jennifer put in the chat, this is not just for California, this would be across the United States. Internationally too, why not? Do instructors need to know how to code to write their own questions? Yeah, that's a good one. So if you, so I do not, let me start with this, but I'm not a coder. I have used R, which is a semi-coding system to do some statistical analysis in previous research. So I have some coding experience, but it's very much learned on the fly. You do not necessarily need to know how to code to write auto-graded system or questions. You can write as many delayed or non-auto graded questions. It's just writing text at that point. You know, they have a create new question and you type in your text and you can run with that. For the auto graded questions, it is important to have some experience, but I'll tell you what I do is I go find one that's similar to what I want to do. I copy and paste that code into what I want, and then I make the changes within that. So, you know, it's very much you can get by with copying and pasting. If you know how to code, you can do some awesome things, but you don't have to know how to code. And it really depends on how you want to use it. And I don't know if I mentioned this too. One thing that is really cool about this is these questions can also be integrated if you're using a LibreTexts textbook. You can integrate that into one of the practice problems for that question. Yeah. Do we create an account to start using ADAPT in our courses? How do we get started? Yeah, so you can start, I believe you can request an account. You can just go to, I just Google ADAPT LibreTexts and it takes you, you can create an account. You have to, you have to ask for instructor permission to get the instructor rights within the account, and you can request an account. You know, if there we go. Jennifer just put in the chat, you can go to info@libretext.org or adaptlibretext.org, and then that would be a great way for you to explore ADAPT. You could go to the Commons and see the different questions available for your discipline. If you use H5P Studio and the native questions, you don't need to know to code. Is that a response to, do you need to know to code? I believe so. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I'm a user of ADAPT, and I have some capabilities of editing. I am not I'm not involved in the code. Eric Keene has really been critical in that, And but I do have some capacity to do these things. Yeah. And I know there's you know, if there's a lot of different systems that have question options that may not be here. Let me stop sharing here. There's a lot of other things that use code for questions, and so you can actually import questions from different resources into ADAPT. I have not personally done that, but I know that capacity exists. And you know, as I share my slides, and I would encourage you to go. I can put it in chat actually. I would encourage you to check out Delmer's YouTube video about ADAPT, because in that video, add when I click on the, so there's the link to the YouTube video. I encourage you to check that out because it talks about, you know, the different aspects of ADAPT, as well as has other videos about how to use ADAPT. And so that in the LibreTexts page, there's a lot of different videos about doing things and so forth. Any concerns about ADAPT and using ChatGPT? I don't know. I wonder if you could use ChatGPT to write code for your questions. That would be a fun exploration. So as you know, you put anything online, there's always going to be an opportunity for students to use that and search for the answers and so forth. You know, the OpenStax questions, they've been online for a long time. Those are the questions that I use in my class. And so you can Google those questions and you can find solutions. Now, one of the things we're integrating into the ADAPT is what we'll call algorithmic. And so, you know, if we have a template for a question, and you can change the amounts if you're doing math. So student A might start with 30 grams of something, and student B would start with 25 grams. And so their answers are different. The problem solving is the same. So, you know, when you do things online, there's always an opportunity to take advantage of the internet to find solutions and solve problems. That's, I think, just it's just the nature of the beast. But, you know, we can think of ways around it. One of those being the algorithmic. But I think it's just something that's going to happen, and how much you commit to avoiding that would be how you build things into your course. For example, you know, when I switched to the participation type of homework, I noticed that my students were much more active to try it rather than search for the answer, because they knew the points weren't connected to them getting it right or wrong. The points were connected to them participating. Now, of course, if you're using this for a quiz, that's a different story, right? We would want to make sure that we don't have the ability to look for things online. But you know, it's somewhat down to, we're using an online system, so the internet is going to be part of that system. But I'd be interested to see if a ChatGPT could write a question for ADAPT. I might look into that. That solves your coding problem, right? Yeah, you're welcome. So I'm not seeing any other questions in chat. So if there aren't any other questions, I've got another meeting coming up, so I might need to hop into that. I appreciate all of your time and coming to my talk here. I hope I've presented ADAPT well and enticed you to look into using ADAPT. And you can always email me or, of course, the LibreTexts team, ADAPT team, about information in using ADAPT.